Hi everyone, it's Mel with Quilting Room with Mel, and we are starting our paper piecing series today. So I have a section of the paper piece pattern on the table here so that we can look at it. It is numbered. And that's what we do. I mean, we're kind of doing a paint by number with fabric. So we'll cover section 1 and 2, and we'll on the back side, and I'll show this later. But we have 1, and then we add 2 and we sew, and then we add 3 and we sew, and then we add 4 and then we add 5, and ta-da! We have one section of our block done. So let's take a look at what we're doing. So here's the block that we're making. It's just a simple star. I've done really high contrast fabrics so that you can see all the pieces easier as we're learning. Of course, you can make it in any color that you want to. So why would we paper piece? Well, as you could see in the block when I showed you, there are a lot of angles there that would be on the bias. They would be bias pieces. It would stretch. I didn't use one piece of fabric cut on the bias. Everything started out as a rectangle. Super accuracy. My points came out beautifully because I could line everything up on here. I mean, every one of those solid lines is a sew line. I know exactly where to sew. No guessing, nothing like that. This is a pretty simple block, and that's what I wanted for your first time. As we go through, we'll get a little bit more difficult. So let's get started. So we need a few things to make our 8-point paper piece star. The first thing we need is our pattern. You can click the link right up here to head over to the website to find out how to get it. We need 4 pages of it. Each page has 2 of the 8 points. And we're going to make, so we'll make 8 of these. Now you certainly do not have to go with wild, crazy colors like I did. I'm using this so you can clearly see each step in the process. So we also need fabric. We need each one of these, and you can head over to the website when you get your pattern. It'll have the sizes you need to cut. And the reason that is important is here's our pattern. We have to be able to cover not just this part here, but we have to be able to cover out here. It's hard to see the dotted line. You can kind of see it there. That dotted line is actually our seam allowance. So when we get this all done, we'll trim around on the dotted line. Of them, we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's this page. And the other half will start at 6 and go up. So we're going to start with 6. That's our lowest number. We always start with our low number or smallest letter. And that would be our black. But we do not put it on the side with the numbers. We have to flip it over and put it down. And this can be a little difficult. When you do it, I always go to this side, hold it up into the light to make sure I'm covering all the way to the dotted and at least 1/4 of an inch on all my other sides. Once I have that first fabric where I want it, because I'm going to have to add my second one, I just grab a stick of washable school glue, lift it up, put a little dot, it doesn't need to be much, and stick it down so that it'll hold while I put on piece number 2. And that's our small piece. Now, your gut is going to tell you you want it like that. So it covers everything, right? But we are going to sew on this line right here, so that's not going to work. We've got to bring it down so that when we flip it back, it covers the whole section. And again, I hold it up to the light, find it, and then we'll go sew on this line. One other thing before we go sew, we need to set our sewing machine to about a 1.5 millimeter stitch. We want it small enough that it'll perforate the paper so it's easy to tear away, but not so small that it cuts the paper and then we lose our pattern. So I'm just going to start here, so right to there, and that's it. Okay, so we have our seam sewn. The first thing I do is I kind of finger press it back just to make sure that I'm covering 1/4 inch over here. And I'm just barely there, but that's okay. I have 1/4 inch, that's what matters. Then we fold our paper right along our stitch line. So we have that. And then you need a ruler that has 1/4 inch mark. And I'm going to trim everything else off. So I have my seam allowance. And then I'm going to go press this open very gently so that I don't twist my fabric. When you're doing paper piecing, no steam. Steam is the enemy of paper. So just a gentle press to get that flat, and then we'll add our next piece. So this is what we have now. We have piece 6 and piece 7 on. Now we're ready for piece 8. Or piece 2, depending on which leg you're working on. That's our orange. And this one's really long. I'm not sure why I didn't cut it down. Same thing. We don't want to put it like that so it covers the whole thing. We want to put it down so that when we flip it open, it covers the whole thing. And again, take it where you can see light through your paper and make sure you are 1/4 inch above this line, out of this line, and you're to the dotted line on the edge. And that when you flip it up, you'll be 1/4 inch above this line. When we sew, we're going to sew right here. Okay, so we have our next piece sewn on. I've already flipped it up and made sure that it covers, and it does. So we're going to fold it right here where we stitched our paper. Again, excuse me, again. And we're going to trim 1/4 inch. When you're going through areas that have a lot of fabric right there, that you push down enough that your rotary cutter does make it through all the layers. And then we're going to gently press that open, and we'll be ready to add our next piece. So now we are ready to add piece number 9. And that's our green. I'm going to grab one of my greens. And we're sewing on this line, so that's where I want to set my raw edge up. 1/4 inch. And these are kind of weird. I mean, you're going to think it's weird because we're sewing at that angle. Hold it up, make sure that we have 1/4. Kind of flip it over and hold it again to make sure I'm making it to the edge, which I just barely am. So when I sit down at my sewing machine and I can get it up to the light a little bit better, because My light's above my camera. I'll make sure that I've scooted it so that I have a full there on the edge. Okay, here we go. And you can see I rotated my fabric. When I was showing you before, I had it go in like this. Well, I quickly realized when I could get it to the light that my fabric needed to be going like that. So I've already folded it back, made sure it covered everything that it needed to, and it does. So again, we fold our paper along our stitch line and trim at 1/4 of an inch for our seam allowance. And I'm going to go press this open, and then we'll add our final piece. Okay, so we just have one piece left, a green piece, that we're going to add. We're going to make sure that we're covering. See, this one is the one that I needed to go this way. And that's why we always double check. We're going to sew along this line here. Okay, so we have our last piece on. I've already folded it back, made sure it checked, so we're going to make sure it covered. So we are just going to fold it over and trim out our seam allowance. Go press this open, and then we're going to trim up, because I know this does not look like a section of a star block, but it will, I promise. So this is what we have, and I know you're looking at it going, that looks nothing like that piece other than the colors are right. And I promise you, I did not put anything in my copy before I started filming this. The trick now is we're going to flip it over and we're going to trim. Remember that dotted line I talked about at the very beginning? We're going to trim all of our fabric away using that dotted line as our cutting. And yes, paper piecing makes a lot of scraps, but it's also a great scrap buster. So save those big pieces, and you can use them in your next one. And the reason, like, we have a lot of green left over there. The reason I do that, especially since we're just starting our paper piecing, I oversized the blocks quite a bit because it is so much easier to cut fabric away than it is to add fabric. And you really can't rip out and go again with paper piecing. So we just use we use a little bit more fabric. Now as we get harder, we probably won't have as much left over because we'll be better at it. We won't need it. And now we've trimmed all that away. We flip it over and look, we have our unit. And if you put these together, you can kind of start to see the block come together. So I've already made 2. That means I have 6 more to go. So I'm going to get those done, and then we'll put our block together. Do not take your paper off the back. We'll do that later. For right now, just go repeat the steps I just showed you. Remember, start with your lowest number. You're either going to start with a 1 or a 6 and count on from there. Okay, so we have all 8 of our sections made. I have all my ones that start with 1 on one side, all the ones that start with 6 on the other side. Paper's still on them. We are not taking the paper off until we are completely done. This is really simple. We just align our two sections. Make sure our fabric gets in there. And we're going to sew along this line. We're going to do that for all 4 sections, and then we'll come back. Okay, so we have our 4 sections. I've opened 2. I did not press them with an iron. I just finger pressed them open. It's really easy to do. Paper's still on. But now we're going to join our 2 halves, or we're going to join 2 of our quadrants to make a half. And I did it so I could lock my seams together down here all the way through. And again, it makes it so easy because they gave us the line, and we're just going to sew on that line. I'm going to make the 2 halves, and then we'll join the 2 halves together. Okay, so we have half of our quilt block made, and now we are going to tear some paper off. There's a lot of bulk right down here. In any star block, when you join the 2 halves to make an 8-point star, the paper just adds unnecessary bulk. So we are going to tear off, and to do that, you just kind of pull it back, grab a corner, and pull. Make sure you're not getting a hold of the fabric underneath. Just making sure I get it all out of that seam. Because it will get very difficult to tear out once we have it looks good. Okay, I'm going to repeat the same thing with the other half, and then we'll put our 2 halves together. Alright, so I have my 2 halves. My seams are clean. I'm just going to finger press it open. Same thing with the other one. Okay, and I'm just finger pressing the other side open so that when I put it together, those seams will lock. If your seams don't lock, you can hit it with an iron. There's nothing wrong with that. And make sure that middle seam is locked. I am going to put a pin in it when I get over to my machine to hold it. We're going to sew right across and put our block together, and then we have to take all the paper off, and that's probably the worst part of paper piecing, but we'll be right back. Okay, so we have our block done. You just did your first paper pieced block. Now the step is to rip all of this paper off the back. If you have kids, give it to them. Trust me, that's what I did when I was a kid. I ripped my mom's off. You just have to find a spot, get it torn, and then they'll peel off pretty easily. Once you have all the paper peeled off, it's time to press it, and you're done. And then you can use this as a pillow, a wall hanging. You can make a bunch of them and make a quilt. Okay, I didn't want to leave you without giving you guys some tips on how to make this project even easier. So here is the paper that I use. It's just cheap typing paper. And why did I use that? It shows up wonderfully in video. There is paper out there made specifically for paper piecing that you can run through your printer. There's a link in the description of this video more than that paper. It is wonderful for paper piecing. It is horrible for video. So I'm using cheap typing paper so that you guys can see the pattern. Another thing, really, you don't have to go buy fancy dancy fabric glue. Run to the school section of your local big box store, grab you some washable school glue sticks. It works because you're just putting a dot. To sew, we're sewing on that line. Don't watch your needle. If you watch your needle, you will miss your line. My foot, I'm trying to get this up to the camera so you can see it, has that little notch in the middle. And I just ran that line through that notch. As long as that line was in the notch, I knew I was going to be fine. Trim your threads as you go. I know I tell you that on regular piecing projects too. It is very important on here. So what I use are my curved applique, because I can get right up to the paper or the fabric, cut it, and I don't have to worry about cutting underneath. Don't be thinking, because you're going to get some pieces like this when you trim your first section, and you go, oh, I don't know why she said I needed that other one. See, it covers perfectly. The only one we're covering is the first one. After that, we have to worry about, you know, it's going to be sewn here, then flipped up, and it's backwards. When you get it over here and you try, it's not going to work. Save this big piece for your next project. Trust me, you'll use it again. If your paper does get stuck, when you're tearing it off, be careful. You don't want to pop stitches when you tear your paper away from your pattern. If it is stuck and you can't get it, hit it with the iron or with your steam. Remember, I told you earlier, don't ever steam, because it makes the paper wet and then it kind of falls apart. But when you're done, that's a good thing. I hope everyone enjoyed this video. Be sure to sign up in the description below so that you can get the next video if you'd like to continue this series. And until next time, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter below so you can get the other patterns. See everyone later.